Thank you for joining us. This episode is focused on the Netflix adaptation of Anthony Doerr's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, All the Light We Cannot See. We both loved the book and were thrilled when we saw that Netflix was creating a version for television. To be honest, though, we were a little nervous about how a novel like this was going to translate to the screen, but did see that it was in capable hands and that Anthony Doerr was involved with the process. So listen in to find out what we thought.
So, All the Light We Cannot See. I noticed that, like, even though the show and the book started off, like, in a very similar manner, that's, like, they started off in the future, or in the present, I guess, of them, both characters, Marie-Laure and Werner, being in Sun Below. Both the show and the book did start off that way, but instead of like kind of going back immediately to both of their childhoods and kind of like, I guess, switching between them as they were growing up and then transitioning back to them in the present. The show actually, I noticed, stayed a bit more in the like present in Sun Below, and therefore had a lot of the characters like explaining like their motivations, explaining who they were, why they were there, to other characters in a way that, like, maybe because we both read the book, that way that seemed to me a little bit forced, but it probably wouldn't have seemed that way if we were both like entirely new to this. But in doing so, it did kind of sacrifice a bit of their childhoods for like really developing like an interesting hook to kind of, I guess, keep people watching the series. So I just think it was like interesting why the showrunners might have made that creative decision. No, it wasn't necessarily a bad thing, just something that I noticed. But definitely, like, I noticed that the music played a very like strong role, like both the music and both, like, I think like the three main things that at least episode 1 revolved around were the music of the show, the radio broadcasts, and the gem, the Sea of Flames. And like, I think the reason why this show, more than like other ones we might have watched, this show especially like makes it a point of emphasizing like sound and both like the visual and the and like audio, is because of like the radio being such a focal point in the story as it's unfolding. And definitely I feel like the show itself does not shy away from that. It like really wants to make a point that like a lot of progress in the story is made because of the radio broadcasts, like for like Werner being in Sun Below to find radio broadcasts, and Marie-Laure like broadcasting radio transmissions, and the I don't remember what that guy's name was, but the German officer who's looking for Marie-Laure like being there both for the gem and also like knowing that like and also a whole bunch of the German officers knowing that like the radio broadcast is something very important. And actually on that same topic, the fact that the decision that they made to have Etienne come back earlier on, I thought it was an interesting one because, like, in a way, I feel like it was a result of like explaining more things in like the Sun Below setting instead of letting like seeing the characters go through their childhoods and explaining all of this through that. It's more told than shown. And I think having Etienne come back like earlier than he did in the book might have been a result of that, because otherwise the audience might have been left wondering like who are all these new characters, why are they not here, etc. So I do feel like that was a result of having to rush a bit, because I mean it took us a very long time to read this book, partially because it was so in demand and we were listening to it as an audiobook. But I feel like I think there's only like six or eight episodes of this show, and honestly I feel like that probably wasn't enough. But in the same sense, I don't believe that they should have used 2 seasons of a show to let this story play out. So I just think it's interesting, like the specific things that they're changing in the show as opposed to the book. Specific things they're adding, specific things they're changing, and really like why they might have done it. I think probably the why is budget constraints, time constraints, like the little nuances of adapting text to film. But I mean, who knows? Maybe you can tell me more about that, because you like have done like acting and writing and just been around creative creative visual media more much longer than I have. But it just is very interesting looking at things that they've changed.
Yeah, there was a bit of that for me as well, particularly at the beginning, in terms of what I mean by, the distraction about how it was different from the book. And I think it first came to my mind when Marie-Laure was trying to get at the can, and, because she's hungry. And because we read the book, we know that there's peaches in that can. And I was thinking to myself, well, someone who hasn't read the book doesn't know that there's peaches in there. But I mean, at the end of the day, it probably doesn't matter what's in there. You can tell that she's hungry, and that's sort of the idea that's there. And I guess the best way to approach this is to think like Neil Gaiman does when he talks about how his written works are translated or adapted to television or the screen, and thinking of them as separate pieces of art, right? So I think that's how I'm looking at this, and sort of think about it in that way, that this is a separate piece of art and it's inspired by the book. And I think that's probably the best way to do it. And because of that, right, because the book is a long sort of meandering tale, right? And I think, like you said, they did set up a lot of things right away in this first episode. And I think I agree with you. They kind of had to do that, because otherwise the motivations of each of these characters and where they're coming from wouldn't make a lot of sense. So, really building on that. And then, like they started to do in episode 1, is then filling in the blanks by using flashbacks. And I have a feeling that's how they're going to do it, because now it will make sense without having to have all of the long explanation and following the life story of how these two characters got to where they are. And even though it's not going to be done completely chronologically, it will have the same effect. And I'm seeing all of these different images. So and they seem to be true to the book, at least in spirit. So I think, I mean, I feel satisfied with it. So, like you said, in terms of my perspective, because film is a different media, and adjustments need to be made. It's particularly like a book like this, because there just isn't time for the viewer to be taken along on this long story unless they end up making it into an entire, Netflix program, and they have like a whole season to do this, but they only have 6 episodes. And I think because Anthony Doerr is involved with this and the preparation of the screenwriting or the screen adaptation, I think that it works. And I agree, Etienne coming back early like that. So that was that really surprised me. But I think that was needed, because in the book you would have already seen Etienne at this point, right? So of course you're wondering what happened to him, but the viewer hasn't seen him yet. So being introduced to him is, I think, an important aspect, and that way people will understand that yes, the uncle is a real person, right? And I'm sure other details about him are going to come out as we go through these different episodes. I think the one scene, though, that I'm still a little confused about is that part where the SS officer, von Rumpel, that's his name, finds Marie-Laure under the seawall. Because that's pretty different. And then having that whole climax or that cliffhanger with the gunshot. I'm trusting Anthony Doerr for doing this and his judgment on that with the screenwriters or the showrunners. So I'm sure it's going to be fine. But I was like, wow, that's different. But we'll see how it all goes. And outside of that, I'm really loving the acting. I think it's really well cast. The settings are amazing. It looks like they spared no expense on that either. And it really does justice to the beauty of this book. And, on that, I mean, All the Light We Cannot See, as is Cloud Cuckoo Land, Anthony Doerr's version, story of that. Both of them have such beautiful prose. And I think that's the thing that's lacking in a film adaptation is his beautiful writing. But I think the fact that they did spare no expense on the sets and the beauty of the actual, the visual beauty and the cinematography, I think that sort of in some ways makes up for all of the fact that you don't actually see or you're not reading his beautiful prose. But he did win a Pulitzer Prize for a reason for All the Light We Cannot See. And I'm assuming that Cloud Cuckoo Land's going to do well too, because I thought that book was great too. And I'm actually wanting to read more of Anthony Doerr's books. I think that because there's a lot more out there, so maybe we should start looking at those. And then the other thing, like, because we did read this book in such a long, drawn out period of time, because we were actually listening to it on audio and of course borrowing it from Libby. So every time we ran out of time, we had to return it, and then it was so popular that sometimes it would take 12 weeks before we could get it back. And the same thing happened with Cloud Cuckoo Land. So even though relatively speaking, we finished this book not too long ago. Like I know Cloud Cuckoo Land we finished more recently than that, but it took such a long time to read or listen to the book because of that. I'm finding it really special in a way to be reminded of the scenes because, and even with those flashbacks, and I just really like that because the book isn't as fresh, and then seeing the scenes and the flashbacks, and then remembering what it was like to read those parts and how much fun that was, and the sort of like the visual that you get when you're listening or reading to a book. And then seeing it translated to the screen I'm really enjoying that part. So I'm looking forward to watching the other 5 episodes, because so far we've just done the one. So first episode is doing well, and I'm looking forward, like I said, to the rest.
Well, after watching episode 2, I really do see what you're saying about the fact that they really changed a lot, and that the show should be considered as something separate from the book, something a different creative work from the book. So I'm gonna follow your lead, and I'm going to, I think, talk about just like specific scenes in the show itself that really struck me as to like how they portrayed or even like invented certain scenes in the show as opposed to the book, because I know you were also saying that we did read it, like both this and Cloud Cuckoo Land, but we read those books over like a very long period of time just because we have so little time in our lives. Which honestly kind of leads me into the first thing that I wanted to really talk about with seeing both episode 1 and episode 2, but I especially noticed more in episode 2, is like the fact that yes, the book did do this as well, but in the show, like you really are forced to notice like how time is like skipping around, and it sometimes is a little bit jarring, and other times it does kind of make a bit more sense. So like for example, when like Marie-Laure was like in the under the seawall with Von Rumpel and getting like forcibly interrogated, that was like a whole thing that I don't I don't think that happened in the book. But then she like switched back to when her and her father were leaving Paris with all of the jewels and such. And I like at first I thought I was like a little bit weirded out by that, because like they were played by like both her and Werner were played by the same actors in both the present time and in the 4 years ago flashback time, and that kind of threw me through a little bit of a loop. But I think with that, like it kind of almost blends together these two like distinct periods of time, and I think like it was a conscious decision. I'm pretty sure that the showrunners chose to have the same actors with like slightly different hairstyles play the same characters, even though it is a 4 year time gap, and like around that age, like it wouldn't be a very odd thing to have these two characters played by two separate actors for like the 4 years ago and for the present, because like they're like teenagers, and obviously their faces and such change quite a bit in a short amount of time. But it was interesting that they chose not to do that, either because maybe they felt that the characters, like that the actors could play the characters well, and that it wouldn't really cause that much confusion, or maybe they felt because these events that happened 4 years ago, even though technically they're being shown in flashbacks, that they're so integral to who they are now, that the fact that they chose to blend these two time periods together in like an almost a very seamless way. Like one moment we're in the past and one moment we're in the present. It was just very interesting to me, and especially I also noticed when the officers were forcing Werner to go around in the car and try and locate Marie-Laure towards the end of the episode. It like switched between him doing that and him like I'm pretty sure it was him fixing the radio for the SS officer, and like and also like being at the school, and like because it's showing that this series of events directly led to what's happening now, and it kind of really drives home the point that like this war like completely transformed the lives of both of these children and made them like who they were, who they are like in the present.
So I agree. Like I think that we do have a lot to unpack with this, and yeah. So because the book is really a lot different from the series, and it's kind of a distractor to be thinking about those differences, because I think the production is fantastic, the acting is amazing, and the cinematography is amazing, as you were already discussing, and I'll look at that as well. So I think, you know, it is a distraction thinking about how different it is from the book. So yeah, thinking about it as a separate piece of art and going with that, I think, is probably the best way to look at it, because otherwise it's kind of hard to enjoy, because you're always thinking, well, that's not what happened in the book, right? So yeah, so I think that's really the way I'm approaching it, because I don't want that to ruin my experience with it, because like I said, I think that it's a fabulous piece of work, and thinking about it as a separate piece of art is probably the best way to go. And thinking about what you're saying with the actors, and I mean, yeah, because in the book that both of them, Marie-Laure and Werner, were younger, right? And in this way, I feel like they're playing, like they're older actors playing younger, not to distract with from how, how good they are, but I think, in terms of the choice, I mean, that's not the actor's fault. I mean, the actors are doing an amazing job, but I just feel like I really notice it the most with Werner. Um, and again, it's probably because we read the book, right? Like it might not be as distracting if you didn't realize how young they were in the book, but even so, like with Werner, and he's wearing like a schoolboy uniform with the short pants, and they're talking about him as a boy, and when I look at him, he doesn't look like a boy to me. So I think especially that part where he was fixing the radio for the SS guy and his wife, and and using the chewing gum, and um and I know from my mother that back at that time, I mean, they would chew the same piece of gum for days because it was so hard to get gum. So I was thinking about that, but yeah, I mean, he looked in my mind older than he's supposed to be, even if I hadn't read the book. So there is that. So so I mean, I think that they would maybe look that age at the end of the war, right? Because it's supposed to be over 4 years. So yeah, I see where you're going with that. But again, I'm trying not to, I'm debating on whether it's because I read the book and I know that they were younger in the book. And so maybe that's part of it. But I think, with Marie-Laure, I really noticed it when she was walking with her dad when they were leaving Paris, and he was talking to her about how she was carrying the radio, and that she was talking as if she's a young girl, but when I look at her, she doesn't look young. I mean, she looks young, of course, but she looks like a young woman, not like a young girl. So in that part I found a little bit odd, but again, it's not the actor's fault. It's the choice for casting, instead of using a younger child, and the young girl that's playing with the young Marie-Laure, I mean, she's fantastic. But I guess they thought that she was too young, but I almost think that that was the age that she was when she left Paris, when I was reading the book. So again, I don't know if it's just because I read the book with you that I'm finding this a little odd, but there is that element of it. But of course, the acting is amazing. I mean, they're doing a great job in it, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm invested in it. So yeah, it's just these little things like you're saying about the choice of the actors. So I don't know. We'll see. We've got 2 more episodes to go, so hopefully that won't keep distracting me, because that's what it is. It's a distractor. So anyways, and then thinking about what you're saying with the jumping around, like, in the book he does that as well, but I think that with the jumping around in the book, and I mean, he does that in his other books as well, right? With Cloud Cuckoo Land, there's a lot of jumping around as well between time and Cloud Cuckoo Land, not just between time and but also between time and space in a huge way. um in terms of different generations and eons of people. But um in the book, I feel like it wasn't as surprising, because or I think you said jarring, because there would be an extended period of time in that other space, or in that other age, or whatever it was, however you want to refer to it. Whereas here it cuts and it's just very short, and then it goes back again. um, so I think that's why it's hard to get settled in the one time, and then you're right back in the other one. So yeah, there is an element of that.
Like, one scene that really did strike me in this specific episode was when, like, Werner was, like, outside of the office of, like, the medical examiner in the institute in Berlin, and he was just sitting, like, on the bench, like, almost, like, shell shocked. And it just is like it's just a side view of him sitting on this bench with all of this sunlight streaming in through the windows. And it's just, I don't really know what it is about this specific scene, but like, it's just him being in such, like, an obviously, like, dark and probably terrified place, but this light still coming in through the window nonetheless really like, and the show itself keeps coming back to the things that like the professor said about like the fact that light is always there and light can never be like taken away, even coal, light comes from coal, all this stuff. And it just really struck me that like we just like we see him like being hit by the sunlight that's coming in through the windows of this like terrifyingly dark and oppressive place. And then like I think I noticed like when he was still sitting outside of this office and the like younger boys came like marching behind the older officer, then they just walked past him. None of them were really hit by the light, even though they were walking like directly under it. None of them were hit by the light, or at least the light didn't focus on them, but it focused on Werner instead. And like I'd be interested to see if this kind of theme continues, where he in the institute is constantly highlighted, whereas the other boys around him might not be. That would be an interesting thing to look at, which I'm going to try and look at as we watch more.
That is really an interesting observation. I did not notice that with the play of light. So I actually went back and looked at that scene again with Werner in the hallway when the little young boys at the school were marching in front of him. And yeah, you're totally right. I mean, he's in the light, and they kind of walk through it, and it doesn't seem to leave him. So that's really an interesting device, and I think that whole idea comes to the light we can't see or we cannot see, and how Werner and Marie-Laure are supposed to be the light in the darkness. And I think that, and then when it comes to Werner, I mean, he's in a really dark place. I mean, the war, of course, is dark, but he's really in a dark place. And I really think that's an interesting thing and an interesting observation, because I'm just enjoying it and I did not notice that. But I think the use of light that really caught my attention when I thought about it is with the burning carousel, which of course is not in the book, but with the burning carousel and that sort of image with Marie-Laure staring at that, and I'm wondering how much of that she could see. Like, she is blind, yes, but she might be able to see shadows, and it's kind of an interesting choice to kind of have them just miss each other there, right? Because he's dumping the body there, and it's just really an interesting use of light there, and that's sort of an image that's sort of in my brain that I can actually see in my mind's eye. So I thought that was really quite a beautiful, even though it was a little bit unpleasant what was happening, but it was beautifully done, and another, I think, a really good example of the use of light. And I'm sure as we watch the next two episodes, there's probably going to be more use of that, and I'm going to pay more attention to it now that you mentioned it.
And another thing that like I also happened to notice is that like slow motion shots are actually used quite a bit. At least I didn't notice so much in the first episode, but definitely in the second episode. But it always is used in conjunction with something very like very traumatic or like life-changing, but in a negative way, happening to either of the main characters. So the first time I noticed this was when the Nazi banner was like thrown over the balcony of, I think, the train station that Marie-Laure and her father were going to get out of Paris, and then being told that they couldn't leave because the last train had just left. And then immediately after, seeing this banner hoisted over the edge of the balcony in this train station, even though she couldn't see this, even though Marie-Laure couldn't see this, the camera still showed this balcony or this flag like flapping down in slow motion, just to like really, and it really just focused on that image for an almost uncomfortably long amount of time, even though it wasn't that long, but it just really felt very impactful. And then again, this is something that the Nazis taking over Paris changed the course of Maria Laura's life in a bad way, because after that, like, these terrible things happened to her, like the war. And then the other time I noticed this during this episode was when Werner was being chased by the boys at the Institute right after he got there, which again, that was not something that happened in the book, but I do kind of understand why the showrunners chose to put it there. But when he was being chased, the whole scene was in slow motion. And this is another thing that I really think had a tremendously negative impact on his character. Like, it was very traumatic, obviously, because he got beaten up right as soon as he got to this place where he was sure. I think in the show more it's highlighted that he really doesn't think it's a good thing for him to be here, but in the book it was a little bit more of like it was a little bit more of a long period of time, and he kind of got used to the idea of that, like, he can still try and educate himself but stay separate from the whole, like, ideology of, like, the Reich at the Institute. Whereas in the show, since there was no like exam, there's no like formal examination at the school, there was no like trial period, no I think it comes to mind is that scene where he jumps off the ladder at the entrance exam, and like almost and a whole bunch of boys before him had like broken bones and such jumping off this ladder. But there was nothing like that. He basically just got pulled up in the middle of the night by that one officer who had gotten him to fix his radio, and he was like, "Oh, congratulations, you passed my test." And it was a much more like sinister and abrupt change that I feel like this is why things in the chase scene happen so much earlier in the show, and why I feel like the being at the Institute, the whole shock of being plunged into the world of this Institute, really took such like a very negative toll on like Werner's like whole psyche, and it was shown in slow motion yet again. So I think time is kind of being played with, at least in the second episode. Time is really being played with and seeing very both fluid and dynamic, and also very static and like shocking. And it's just very interesting, the things that are happening in the show. That, like, yes, it's called All the Light We Cannot See. It focuses on light visually. It focuses on the theme of the radio, hearing, auditory, and there's a character who's blind, and it now focuses on like kind of time and the perception of reality, and just it's bringing in like all of your senses through just a show. It's very interesting how these choices that are being made have done this.
Again, I wasn't even really thinking about the use of slow motion. But yeah, I went back and looking at the fluttering of the Nazi flag at the train station. And then also with the slow motion when Werner was running from the boys, when he was, being welcomed to the institution. But that they were also, while he was running, they were, sharing the words of his first letter back home to his sister. And, with that slow motion, it allows them as well to not only sort of show how horrifying the situation is, but also, the contrast to what he's saying to his sister, while this terrible thing is happening to him. And I, yeah, that was really quite clever. And like I said, it does give them that period of time to sort of superimpose two thoughts together, so that you can really get a sense of, how tormented everything is with Werner, and like that, nasty doctor was saying that he was going to become a man and the child he was is going to die. So, yeah, I thought that was really well done. Another thought about episode 2 that I was just thinking about as well, and again, I know this is a distraction from the book, But when when Marie Laure and her dad are out before they steal the car, and they're in the barn in the by the firelight, and again use of light, but and he's looking at the sea of flames, um, and I'm wondering, is that the Sea of Flames? Because in the book, right, they gave replicas to some people, and the real one to one person, and none of them really knew who had the real one. And we kind of figure that Marie Laure's dad has the real one, but I don't think they did that here. I think that he knows he's got the real one, because I think that they actually saw him take it out of the vault. So in that regard, he has it. But I guess trying to put that into the series would have been difficult, um, a difficult thing to pull off. So I guess that makes, I don't know if that makes it more tension or less tension. If if you're not sure if that's the real one, or if that's the real one and he's got it. So I don't know, but that was another thing I was thinking about. But I do think that he was looking at it, because in the book there is that scene where they're in the barn together, and he does take out the stone and he's looking at it. So um and I mean, he probably knew even in the book that he had the real one, because I mean, that's what his profession was. So, and he had looked at it before. So I'm pretty sure he knew that he had the real one, but he just told Marie Laure that he doesn't know if it's the real one. I don't know, but I can't even remember if he actually did that. But yeah, so that was another little thing that was different. But I different and the same, right? And there's there's an element of that. A lot of the scenes that are from the book are different and the same, right? So I mean, even when he's running away, when Werner's running away from the boys in the institute at the beginning, that doesn't really happen until later. Um, when he's there. I mean, it happens pretty early, but not like the instant he gets there. So, but so it's different and the same. So that's sort of interesting. So there's things that are definitely not the same, and then the things that are the same are a little different. So it's it's kind of an interesting kind of way of looking at it. So yeah, but like I'm enjoying it, and I'm talking about it here with you because we both know different parts of the book, so but we'll see how it goes, because I have a feeling that things are going to get very different now from the book, so it's really going to be a very different story. I don't know why I'm thinking that, but it's just the way the plot is going. So I'm interested to see how it ends, because I don't think it's going to be quite the same. I think one thing that I'm really getting from the series right now is, and it's really how the war changed the two main characters, so Werner and Marie Laure, and how their perspective on their life, and what it means to exist in the world has changed so much during the war. Like, I think that is really an important thing. The other things that I'm not quite sure, like, I'm enjoying this. I don't get me wrong, but I'm just, there's such an emphasis on the radio, and not that there wasn't in the book. There definitely was, but I seem to remember it more in terms of Werner, because he was always with the radio, and the show with the professor. I mean, I think that was something that connected them, but I feel like they're doing that a lot with this series, as opposed to in the book. Like, I know it a bit more at the beginning, and then they connect with each other at the end, in terms of not placement in the book, but in terms of their life story. So that's a little bit different. And then having Marie Laure actually carry the radio around with her, which she didn't do in the book. And I think, I mean, again, not because one is in the book and one's not, but um, having her, because she was doing the broadcasts, right? Of course, she was doing that, but in terms of carrying the radio around with her, um, so I feel like they're really pushing the emphasis of the radio more now on Marie Laure. And with Werner, he was always with the radio, right? And then I don't know if they're going to show everything that happened when he was triangulating and finding all the people that were broadcasting. I don't know if they're going to show that, but there was definitely a lot more of that in the book. So I always associated him more with the actual radio, even though Marie-Laure, was broadcasting, but she's broadcasting a lot more in the series. So I find that an interesting choice that they made, and I don't know how that's all going to connect in the next two. And then the other thing is that things are different, right? So, with Von Rumpel, I mean, and the way I remember in the book, he doesn't find her until the absolute end. And then with the triangulation of Marie-Laure, that's also different. So I don't want to give all kinds of spoilers for the book, but I mean, I guess if you've seen the series, then you kind of know. I mean, I'm guessing you kind of know how it ends, but yeah. So I'm not quite sure how that's all going to come out, because now we're at the end of the second episode, and he's found Marie-Laure already, and he's with the other officer, and I can't remember his name, but now he's with the other officer, and they're about to go inside. So. Which is very different. So I mean, yeah, I'm curious to see what's going to happen, because I mean, this is like new territory, so it's like almost a different story. So like I'm kind of wondering how this is going to go out, because there's still 2 more episodes. So yeah, because that's a lot different. So I don't know, we'll see what happens, but I mean, it's definitely keeping my attention, because I'm wondering, okay, how's Marie-Laure going to get out of this, and what's Werner going to do? And I'm thinking, he's probably going to kill that guy, or something else is going to happen. I don't know, but I mean, somehow he has to get away from the Nazi armies. So I don't know, because I think his options are pretty few right now. So we'll see what happens in episode 3. So I don't know. What did you think about that? I'm not sure, but yeah, I think those are my thoughts right now. I'm engaged. I'm interested to see how the story is going to go, because it really is a different story. So if you look at it from that perspective, I'm enjoying it. And like I said, I'm trying to remove my memories of the book, and just acknowledging that the spirit of what's happening to the main characters is still intact. And it's a great story. It's engaging, and it's exciting, and it's beautifully done. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing episode 3.
Thank you for listening to our conversation on the first 2 episodes of the Netflix production of Anthony Doerr's All the Light We Cannot See. As you can tell, we had a lot to discuss. We hope you catch our next podcast to hear our take on episodes 3 and 4. We'd love to hear what you thought of episodes 1 and 2, so please comment if you can. We're grateful to you for joining us and being part of the Birds on Power Lines podcast.